Russia is sending a nuclear submarine to Cuba, and along with that they will be sending dozens of aircraft and warships. And the last time this happened, it almost caused World War III. According to Cuban officials, 4 warships and Russia's best nuclear submarine, the Kazan, will arrive in Havana next week. Cuba is just 150 kilometers off the coast of Florida, so this could end very badly very quickly. And Cuba's foreign ministry says that these Russian ships will be in Cuba from the 12th to the 17th of this month. Now it's worth noting that Cuba says none of these ships will be carrying any nuclear missiles. Except, as you probably know, there really is no way of verifying that that's true. But US military officials spoke about this, and they said that it's part of a new Russian military exercise in the Caribbean. And they say that these Russian ships are expected to stop in both Venezuela and Cuba. But in a new change of events, on Wednesday the 5th, Russia has officially classed the United States as an enemy of Russia for the first time ever. And you may know already, but the last time that Russia was in Cuba, it almost started nuclear war with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that's now known as the closest we have ever been to a nuclear war. Now the reason for these Russian exercises is apparently due to the escalating war in Ukraine. And the reason for this is that the US is now allowing Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory using US supplied weapons. And without being biased, you can imagine that firing US missiles deep into Moscow is not going to end well for anyone. And in response to the US authorizing these strikes on Russia, it appears that Russia is doing this new military exercise to potentially try and scare off the Americans. The US officials who reported this a day before the Cuban Foreign Ministry announced it said that this exercise is part of a response to the US for their support to Ukraine. And they also said that it's an effort by Putin to show that his navy is still capable of global power projection. And the same US officials say that Russia has already preemptively notified the US of an upcoming exercise nearby them. But as I said, these exercises will be taking place from the 12th to the 17th next week, so I'll be sure to cover that in my next weekly news recap. But if you're new here, this is my weekly news recap where I summarise all of the news from the last week. Staying on Russia though, if you've watched my previous video, you would know that Iran is now building a new shipping lane all the way from Russia down to Iran. And this shipping lane will replace the waterways with railways, so the cargo will come all the way down from Russia down to Iran's southern port, the Chabahar port, on new railways. And then it will travel from Iran's new largest shipping port, the Chabahar port, where it can go on cargo ships all around the Eastern Hemisphere without ever having to touch the West. Now the reason I'm talking about this again is that Russia has now said they will be using that shipping lane to transport all of their coal to India. Now in 2023, Russia supplied at least 10% of India's coal, and that's roughly 17 million tons. And India is one of the largest consumers of coal in the world. Now the reason why this new shipping lane is important is due to it totally destroying the West's control over the shipping lanes. Usually Eastern ships will have to sail all the way around Europe and through the Mediterranean through Western controlled countries, or vice versa if they're heading the other way. And with Russia now saying they will be using these shipping lanes, it certainly shows that they are supportive of the idea of the West losing control of all the ships. And just for context, this shipping lane is expected to be fully active within the next 12 months, so you could see the West potentially fighting over getting control of the shipping lanes again. But still staying on Russia briefly, both Syria and Russia did joint military exercises yesterday. The exercises they did was simulating protecting a military base from an attack from the Mediterranean. They simulated an enemy firing missiles and drones towards one of their military bases, and they activated their air defences and tested those to see if they worked. And the Russian Ministry of Defense says that these exercises were a great success. They said they managed to intercept all of the targets even though they were fired from just 150 kilometers away. Now moving to Israel, on Thursday, Russian President Putin gave a speech about the current situation in Gaza. In that, Putin said, "What's happening in Gaza does not really look like a war." He said that it looks more like the total destruction of a civilian population. And in his speech, he also said the US are the ones who are at fault for this war starting in Israel. And he said that this is due to the US's weak foreign policy under Biden. He also said that he remains hopeful for an internationally recognized Palestinian state. And when he was saying that, he added that Russia has recognized Palestine since the former Soviet Union. And one of the final things he said in his speech is that all of the countries from the Middle East should come together and work on a ceasefire deal that recognizes an international Palestinian state. But separately to this, it's worth noting that Russia has already delivered over 500 tons of humanitarian aid to Gaza, and they are now officially the largest supplier of aid to Gaza that is a non-Islamic state. Now staying on Israel, on Monday the 3rd, the Maldives officially banned all Israeli citizens from entering into the country. In response to this, Israel released a statement asking all Israeli citizens that are in the Maldives to return back to Israel immediately. They say the reason for this is that it will be hard to get any Israeli citizens out of the Maldives if anything happens to them whilst they're there. Now, it's worth noting that almost 20% of Israelis have dual citizenship, which means they should still be able to get in and out of the country regardless. And in 2023, about 11,000 Israeli citizens entered into the Maldives, and they made up about 0.6% of all tourist arrivals. Separately to this, about a month ago, the Maldives issued a statement welcoming an ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu and other Israeli government members. So the Maldives definitely has a strong support for the people living in Gaza at the moment. But apart from the Maldives joining the list of countries that have distanced themselves from Israel, this probably won't have much effect on the war. Now, the last point on Israel, Colombia has now officially ended all coal exports to Israel. And this is actually such a big deal, it could potentially force Israel to stop their war on Gaza. The president of Colombia said that coal exports will resume when the genocide stops. In the first 8 months of 2023, Colombia exported over $300 million worth of coal to Israel. On top of this, Israel gets over 50% of their coal from Colombia, so this is actually going to have a major effect on the way Israel carries out their war. Obviously, Israel uses the coal to generate energy from their power plants, which then goes towards charging up batteries and other things like that. And all of that energy goes towards fighting their war, but now they won't be able to generate as much energy, which means they could have to scale back their attacks. So without this coal from Colombia, it's leaving Israel in a pretty bad place. It's worth noting though that Colombia already ended all diplomatic ties with Israel back in May. So Colombia is definitely making some big moves in support of the people in Gaza. Now, moving to America, last week the Houthis in Yemen reported a successful attack on the USS Eisenhower aircraft carrier in the Red Sea. Now, the Americans have since denied the attack took place, as you'd expect, except there has been some unusual events that took place shortly after that. For 2 days after the Houthis reported the attack, air traffic on the aircraft carrier totally stopped. Not a single aircraft landed on the carrier for over 2 days, which you can understand is very unusual. And on top of that, the US actually refused to allow journalists to take pictures of the ship or come anywhere near the ship. And this would suggest that they could be trying to hide something, whether that's the attack from the Houthis or something else, we don't know. And the last point, the ship actually sailed over 700 kilometers north after the Houthis reported their attack on the ship. And this was not an expected movement, it was quite unusual actually. The carrier fleet is expected to stay in the Red Sea off the coast of Yemen until at least early July. But I will make clear that I'm definitely not saying the Houthis actually hit the aircraft carrier. I'm just pointing out some unusual things that took place shortly after the Houthis reported the attack on the aircraft carrier. If you want to know my own personal opinion, I don't think they actually hit it just because of how hard it is to hit the ship. Now, staying on the US, just 2 weeks ago, the US Aid Pier that was built for Gaza fell to pieces. And the pier was reconstructed just a few days later and it was back to work. But then last week, if you watched my video, you would know that the pier totally sank and it disappeared. But finally, a week after that, the pier has now been recovered and it's been reconstructed and it's back to work again. Now, if you don't know, this is the US Aid floating dock that was built to bring more humanitarian aid into Gaza. And it cost $320 million to build. And a $320 million pier falling to pieces and then sinking is a pretty big embarrassment for the US. But it's good to know that it's finally fixed and hopefully some more humanitarian aid will get into Gaza for the people there. But separately, this final part is important, at least for me. If you don't know, I've now been totally demonetized across every single social media platform. And that means that now I'm struggling to fund the making and the production of these videos that you watch. And I wasn't provided with any reason for this, and I don't have the option to appeal. It just got taken away all at the same time from every single platform. So that means I've now got to ask for your help. So if you want to help fund these videos and fund the making of them so that I can continue to bring the news to you, then you can join my Patreon. And I want to make clear, I'm definitely not asking for loads, just perhaps instead of giving the BBC your money, you can consider giving me your £5 a month instead. But to join the Patreon, you can go to the top link in the description, or you can go to my website, alexbarnicoat.com. But truly though, this is the only way I'm now able to fund these videos. I'm not just asking for money for the fun of it. I genuinely have no other income from any social media platform. I'm just simply funded by you guys who want to help contribute. I want to make clear though, it's definitely not compulsory. If you can't afford it, that's genuinely fine. A subscribe means more than you know. But for anyone that's interested, the sources for all of the information in this video will be linked in the description below, along with all of the links to my social media platforms, which you can probably see on screen now. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you at the same time next week.